Every year at this time on my podcast, I tell a Christmas story. In the past, I have shared the accounts of the nation of Duvet, the Christmas tree country, and of Wonky, the Christmas clown. These stories, just like my mom's holiday molasses cookies, are made from scratch. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On this weekly podcast, topics, discussions, stories from our lives.
Season 11, Chapter 6.
A Christmas Tale 3.
This year's Christmas Tale is a little-known story of both recent and ancient history. It involves international intrigue, corporate manipulation, and a near-paradigm social shift that would have changed the world forever and still might. This is the story of Joseph John Vance Christian, born September 25, 1972 in Waveland Woods, Iowa, an affluent suburb of Des Moines. He is the first and only child of Dwayne Christian and Martha Vance Christian. Throughout his life, his parents called him Joe and Joey and JJ or John Joseph Christian if he brought home a bad report card. The moniker he liked the least was their little happy accident, in that nobody had expected Joey to ever come along. His parents, Dwayne and Martha, were friends in high school, but never sweethearts. Even when they reconnected years later, there weren't sparks, just a renewal of that friendship. Simply a comfortable relationship, a good friend, and it grew into a mutual respect and then love. After about a year of dating, Dwayne popped the question, wearing a rented Robin Hood costume while riding a rented horse onto Martha's front lawn. They had a lavish wedding and purchased a large home in Waveland Woods with the idea of raising a big family. Both had very modest jobs. Since high school, Dwayne had been employed at the local Braun Multi-Quick Immersion Hand Blender Assembly Plant, where he had worked his way up to assistant day shift manager. Martha was a well-respected local private music teacher who, after the marriage, converted one of the large home's 5 bedrooms into a studio, out of which she taught piano and guitar. Each year, Dwayne bought a brand new truck and Martha a brand new car. They vacationed twice a year, summers in Europe, and during the winter, a stay at their property on Saint-Martin. If you are wondering how they lived so well on middle-class incomes, the clue would come from Martha Vance Christian. That's right, her family owned Vance Jams and Jellies, established in 1847 by her great-great-great-grandfather, Elias Cornelius Clarence Vance, and his wife, Jane. The company is the largest of its kind in the entire tri-state area and has remained in the family this entire time, despite failed hostile takeover attempts by companies like Kraft, Smuckers, and General Electric. Here's some trivia. John Monroe Smucker was a farmhand on the Vance property when he was a teenager and used the skills he had learned to create his own jams and jellies years later in Ohio. Great-great-great-grandmother Jane, well, that's her likeness that is still used on jars of Vance's zesty morning marmalade. As a young girl, Martha learned the family business, working summer jobs from farm to factory. But really, she was a child of whimsy. In college, she studied music and the arts. And although she is a major shareholder in the company, she left the day-to-day handling of Vance Jams and Jellies to the capable hands of her older brother and sister. They enjoyed the corporate life. Martha did not. Fun facts, despite already being a very lucrative business, the Vances always had foresight. As they entered the 20th century, they knew they couldn't exist on jam and jelly alone. The future was in juices and other condiments. Her great-great-grandfather, Clarence Everett Grover Vance, was the one who concocted a beverage of 8 different fruits and vegetables marketed and sold under the name Vance 8, later shortened. Her grandfather, Cecil Reuben Wiley Vance, was president of the National Mustard Council and helped bring about a federal yellow standard that is still used today. Martha's father, Rufus Wesley Moses Vance, was the first one to suggest adding cran to apple juice back in 1962. During those years, the company sponsored a local TV kids show, Vance's Vinegar Hour, featuring Vivian Vinegar and the Vinegarettes. It did well when it had Red Skelton as a lead-in, but after that show was rescheduled, the Vinegar ratings just weren't there, and the show was canceled. And yeah, along the way there were a few other company setbacks. Vance's Clear Relish, Vance's Chunky Mayonnaise with added pulp, and Vance's Authentic Wetback Salsa. Well, the salsa was good, but the marketing department just didn't research the name. There was the misprint on the soy sauce labels that no one caught, so Vance's Soy Sauce hit shelves. Those are now collector's items. Let's see what else. Vance's Non-Spicy Hot Sauce didn't sell. Nor did their venture into sports drinks with Vance Drink. Get advanced hydration with Vance Drink. Sounds good, but the label had a large VD on it. Again, the marketing department. However, Vance still sold a lot of jams and jellies, and their successes greatly outnumbered their missteps. So business boomed. And as I said, Martha left all of this to her older brother, Wesley August Horace Vance, and her older sister, Debbie. Amazingly, Dwayne Christian, despite having grown up in the area before he married her, had no idea that Martha was part of this jam, jelly, juice, and condiment empire. He had no idea he was marrying into money, which of course suited Martha just fine. They probably could have afforded an even more lavish life than they chose, but they were quite content at their upper middle-class house, with their middle-class jobs, and of course with each other. Dwayne also loved the fact that Martha came from such a large family, and one who could trace their history way back. You see, Dwayne was an only child, as was his father, and his father before him. Dwayne's mother had a sister, but she had died way back in grade school as a result of a seesaw mishap. Dwayne's parents were great, but it was always just the three of them. Now, suddenly, Dwayne was part of a large family, and was warmly welcomed, despite not having any middle names. So next on the agenda for the happy couple, starting their own big family with whom they could share their happiness and good fortune. And so they tried. And they tried and tried again. Alas, Martha could not seem to get pregnant. They consulted the best doctors, they flew to private clinics, and they tried. No. So eventually they stopped trying, and for reasons of their own, they rejected the idea of adoption. They resigned themselves to life with no children. It was a feeling somewhere between heartbreak and disappointment. It was no matter. They had each other. They loved each other. They had nieces and nephews. Dwayne helped coach local kids' soccer. Plus, he was really starting to get noticed at the Braun Multi-Quick Immersion Hand Blender Assembly plant, so he could always just throw himself into his work. Martha already doted on all the young children that came to the house for music lessons. She was beloved by them. She was like the cool aunt. For fun, she would sometimes teach them Led Zeppelin riffs. The year Dwayne and Martha turned 50, they took a December romantic trip to spend Christmas in Paris. A few weeks after they got back, Martha felt nauseous one morning, or perhaps something she ate. Then again the next morning. What kind of winter flu bug did she pick up on the trip? Well, I know you're all ahead of me on this, so I'll just tell you. At 50, Martha was pregnant. Impossible, but there it was. Obviously, at this age, there might be challenges, but she was in good health and able to access the best specialists. And September 25th, 1972, a very healthy Joseph John Vance Christian was born. Mom and baby doing well. Joey, JJ, the happy accident, was a joy. He was good at school, decent at soccer, and showed an aptitude for taking things apart and putting them back together, which Dwayne, of course, always bragged about at the Braun Multi-Quick Immersion Hand Blender Assembly Plant. Martha taught Joey piano and guitar, and at school he also picked up saxophone, violin, and the drums. Only child, one-man band. Life was good. When Dwayne turned 70, Martha's gift was an appointment with a DNA specialist in Los Angeles. Though early in this particular science, the doctor claimed he could trace back an ancestry about 10 generations. This kind of thing was really on Dwayne's bucket list, ever since he first heard about it. As an only child of an only child of an only child, who never heard much about his family history, he was always curious. The two traveled to L.A. in October, also using the trip to visit their son Joey, who was attending USC studying business. The DNA doctor results were disappointing to an extent. The doctor was unable to shed much light on Dwayne's origins, other than his ancestry seemed to go back hundreds of years to maybe ancient Hebrews and the Middle East. This is before there were these larger databases that could match and make connections like we have now, and all these ancestry sites and the commercialization of DNA searches. Dwayne and Martha lived well into their late 80s, passed within months of each other, both peacefully in their longtime home on that quiet street in Waveland Woods. Dwayne had taken early retirement from the Braun Multiquick Immersion Hand Blender Assembly Plant, having attained the position of parts warehouse foreman, and he had kept busy on his new hobby of genealogy, diving right into it, even mapping out entire bloodlines and family trees for friends and neighbors. Martha continued giving music lessons out of her studio right to the very end. You know, even on the morning of the day she passed, she had given a guitar lesson to her nephew, Ignatius Patton Trevor Vance. It was Dwayne who went first, then Martha about 6 months later, each surrounded by family and friends, including Joseph, who had moved back into his old room, despite now being a top executive at Vance Jams and Jellies. As a matter of fact, in charge of his own new division, Vance's Sauces and Gravies. After losing both parents, Joseph began the painstaking task of going through all of his folks' personal items, trying to decide what to keep, what to give away, or even throw away. A lot of what he saw were familiar documents, old bills, expired passports, his old report cards, childhood drawings dutifully kept all these years. But then he came across something that he had never seen before. A small black diary belonging to his father. Dad kept a diary? Wow. As Joseph began to read the entries, he realized that this particular diary chronicled only his dad's research into genealogy, particularly his quest to discover more about his own origins. One name kept coming up in the diary, Dr. Reinhold Plain of Stuttgart, Germany. He Googled it. Dr. Reinhold Plain was the world's preeminent authority on genealogy, having won the Nobel Prize in 2006 for his DNA research that managed now to link modern humans back further in time than anyone had been able to previously do. Also, Plain, well into his 80s, was still hard at work every day in his lab located in the suburb of Bratwurst, also known as the Sausage District. In the diary, Dwayne had referenced many letters that he and Dr. Plain had exchanged. Joseph found those letters. They were nearby, wrapped in a Nike golf towel fastened with duct tape. So he began reading. The gist of the letters were that Dwayne had always thought he was a descendant of Jesus Christ. Not in a Son of God sense necessarily, just a man who walked the earth centuries ago and whom people have followed ever since. Dwayne had apparently sent Dr. Plain some cheek swabs, and one of the letters from Stuttgart simply said, "Dear Dwayne, you may be right." In a different letter, Dr. Plain revealed something to Dwayne that he asked him to keep secret. Dr. Plain had acquired a piece of the true cross. In Christian lore, the true cross is believed to be the actual cross Jesus was crucified on. Many churches and sects claim to have relics of the true cross, and it is said that some of these relics over the years have entered the black market. Dr. Plain had one of those pieces. Further, as a scientist, he was able to extract DNA from the ancient dried blood and saliva, and scientifically at least, it matched the era when Christ was alive. The DNA pattern was also very unique. In his career, the doctor took thousands of DNA samples and now had access to literally millions more. He constantly ran programs as a curiosity to see if any matched the DNA he had found on the true cross. None ever even came close. Until Dwayne from Des Moines with the coincidental last name of Christian. When Joseph called the doctor in Germany, he said, "My name is Joseph John Vance Christian. My late father's name was Dwayne." The doctor immediately responded, "You must come to Stuttgart immediately." 2 nights later, Joseph was checking into the Krauthaus, a small nondescript Best Western inn near the doctor's laboratory. Though he traveled under his own name and passport, he checked in as Bruce Wayne and was met in the lobby by Dr. Plain himself. They briskly walked the 2 blocks to the lab, where Dr. Plain had assembled a paragon group of the world's best genealogists. They were all there. Gustav Klink, Itzhak Moss, Bjorn Hammarskjöld, Antoine and Raphael Bourdelais, Palermo Hildebrand, Dr. Dick Denko of New York. There were others, a DNA dream team, all there to study Joseph. Quickly, they took some blood and saliva samples, fed them into the super biocomputer, and within about a half an hour, they unanimously concluded this man, Joseph John Vance Christian, was, on his father's side, the only living descendant of Jesus Christ. They didn't know whether to kneel down and pray or cheer and drink champagne. They chose the latter. The following days were intense, as you can imagine. But what you probably couldn't imagine was that these scientists long ago had formed a secret organization. It started in the 60s, when they would meet at conferences, and they would discuss what would happen if any of them ever found a descendant of Jesus Christ through DNA work. Initially, this was just mind games, some intellectual ping-pong. Most others scoffed at this notion, but these scientists started getting serious. So they founded GEEC, G-E-E-C, but pronounced geek, Genealogists Engineering and Exploring Christ. Most of them now were in their waning years, and some had given up hope, until Dwayne from Des Moines had a premonition, and then found Dr. Reinhold Plain, and then Joseph found Dwayne's diary. These scientists outlined a plan they had formed over time, should they ever succeed in finding this descendant. The plan was not nefarious, not for power or money, and would not go forth without the complete agreement and participation of Joseph. For over 6 hours, they outlined their idea, the most ambitious and outlandish plan of the last 2 millennia. Joseph said, "Yes, I'm in." As soon as Joseph got back, as per instruction, he contacted the country's top law firms specializing in patents, copyrights, and intellectual property. Mazursky, Friedkin, and Kubrick out of Los Angeles. Armed with the letters from Geek, Scientific Evidence et al., they had a meeting. They took the case. Immediately, as per request of their client, the lawyers sent out cease and desist letters to the top 50 retailers worldwide, including places like Macy's and Walmart. Similar orders went to 17 of the world's top online retailers. Basically, it said, the terms Christ, Christmas, and other derivatives are the intellectual property of our client, Joseph John Vance Christian, and we demand you cease and desist the use of these terms in all marketing or related business endeavors. A similar cease and desist letter was sent to the head offices of the Catholics, Baptists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Anglicans, Adventists, Episcopalians, Evangelicals, Calvinists, Methodists, Pentecostals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and the United Church, and about 600 other faiths, asking them to stop citing Christ in any mass, public service, church publication, or like events. This also included the celebration of Christmas. Needless to say, the phones at Mazursky, Friedkin, and Kubrick began ringing off the hook. Lawyers from the aforementioned, mostly starting with, "Is this some kind of joke?" Is this a shakedown? Do you want money? Residuals? What? No, our client just wants you to stop commercializing his ancestor or misrepresenting him for religious purposes. Most of the opposing lawyers just said, yeah, well, see you in court. And they did. Mazursky, Friedkin, and Kubrick successfully obtained an injunction against all of these retailers and churches. Now they were legally obligated to stop saying Christ and Christmas. They argued, surely the intellectual property or copyright would run out over 2,000 years. Christ has to be public domain. Normally, yes, said the judge, unless a descendant was unaware of his own connection and position until recently, which the scientists at Geek had proven. Naturally, this decision was appealed. There was a lot at stake. A higher court agreed with the injunction, but then a federal court sided with the retailers and the churches. Joseph and the lawyers and the scientists appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then finally, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. Simultaneously, so did the Supreme Courts in over 63 other countries. Joseph and the guys at Geek hoped for the ultimate decision before Christmas 2019, but most cases worldwide wouldn't be heard until January of 2020. Many of the world's biggest retailers ignored the injunction anyway and just worked the cost of lawyers and fines into part of doing business. Just like losses in shoplifting, the costs were passed on to the consumer. It's like it's Super Bowl when some bars say, hey, come watch the big game here. They don't say Super Bowl, they say the big game, because they don't have the rights to say Super Bowl. They're not allowed unless they pay. So that's kind of what a lot of other retailers did. You may remember this in 2019. They didn't say Christmas. They said the holidays, 'tis the season, and other things that a descendant of Christ couldn't possibly own. Jingle bells, Frosty the Snowman, Santa Claus, Rudolph with your nose so bright. They just didn't say Christmas, and hardly anyone even noticed. The churches, well, they just did the best they could. Meanwhile, Joseph was getting death threats, along with his lawyers and scientists at Geek. Many of them had to hire private security. They always felt like they were being followed and would constantly hear strange clicks and beeps on their phone. A Facebook page called for a complete boycott of Vance jams and jellies and other products. But it never really took off. And by the way, the company stood behind Joseph and his quest. The scientists at Geek had gotten word that the scientists in other fields were working right now on something that might somehow counter or affect these claims. But rumors were vague. The courts reviewed all the evidence, and most would rule sometime late spring, early summer 2020. And that could affect Christmases forever. But then on March 13th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared a worldwide pandemic emergency, COVID-19. Coincidence? We'll never know. As compassionate people, Joseph and the genealogists at Geek and even the lawyers decided that their case was not what the world needed to be focused on right now. They should focus on the pandemic and their health. They withdrew their appeal across the board in all nations, however, reserving the right to revive the appeal at a future date. Agreed. Dr. Reinhold Plain later told a reporter at the Cleveland Leader-Post that a judge had told Dr. Plain off the record that they probably would have won. And that's where it is. We have many of the world's top scientists who agree that the last descendant of Christ is alive and well. And we have panels and panels of lawyers and judges who agree that he and he alone owns the intellectual property that is Christ, Christmas, and related wording. What is unknown is whether Joseph John Vance Christian will choose to exercise his rights sometime in the future, changing the Christmas holiday forever. Joseph will not comment. We know this. Joseph's division at the company, Sauces and Gravies, has seen record profits in the last 2 years, thanks largely to Joseph's initiative, Vance's Tangy Christmas Dipping Sauce. Oh, and Joseph met and married a chef at Vance's Sauces and Gravies, Marianne. They're pregnant, 6 months, and it's a boy.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.